John chapter 18. Let's set up the passage a little bit before we read it. As you know, we are in the life of Christ what's called the Passion Week, Holy Week. And if you've been paying attention, maybe you've observed something that it seems like as we're going through the Gospel of John at this pretty decent clip, all of a sudden it just slows down. So there are 21 chapters in John. In chapter 13, it just starts 1 week. And so over or almost half of the book is given to 1 week. So this morning, we're going to start a two-part series on Jesus' interaction with Pilate, his trial. And then next week, 3 Sundays, looking at his crucifixion. Not intentionally trying to slow down. We're just trying to trek with John. Well, how is John developing in the story? That's the big question. Not what happened, but rather God inspired this word, inspired John to write it. So how is John tracking with this? And what we see is that, again, he's slowing down. So much that we don't know about the life of Jesus. But it's very important to John that we get this, that we stare at Jesus as he's going to the cross. John is following really all the gospel writers. They do the same thing. And why is that so important? We're going to think about that here in a minute. And last week when we saw Jesus there in the garden, we made the observation as he's being betrayed by Judas that even though he's being betrayed, he's very much in control. Remember, Jesus said in John chapter 16 or John chapter 10 and verse 16, no one lays my life down for me, or takes my life from me, but I lay it down. Jesus said, of my own accord, literally of my own initiative, of my own volition. Jesus doing God's work, and he's doing it the way in which he wants to do it. Jesus is very much in control. And last week, John wants us to know this, so he has Jesus in the garden putting himself forth. Before even they knew what to say, Jesus approaches them. Hey, who are you looking for? He is leading those that are killing him. But this is different now. He's been betrayed by Judas. He's been tried by Caiaphas, the high priest. And now look at verse 38. Verse 28. It says, then they led Jesus. This reminds us of Isaiah 53 and verse 7. That Jesus is led like a lamb going to the slaughter. So now the tenor changes. This is not about Jesus who's in control of everything, although he very much is. The picture of Jesus who is being led, if you will. And so last week, it seems like that the kind of literary tool John was looking at to help us understand this was the control of Jesus over all things. But now he changes his approach. When they lead Jesus, they lead him outside of the house of Pilate. In fact, look at verse 29. So Pilate went outside to them. Look at verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters. And now skip on to about verse 38. Pilate said to him, what is truth? After this, he went back outside. So this story has 3 scenes. The first takes place outside. That's significant. The second takes place inside. That's significant. And the third and concluding scene, the way this wraps up, is it takes place outside. That's John's way of developing this. What Jesus was doing outside Pilate's house, what Jesus is doing inside Pilate's house, both those are instructive, and then how this ends up with Pilate on the outside. So those are the 3 scenes of our story. Let's look at them together. Look back at verse 28, and let's read the first scene. Then they would be the Jews, they led Jesus from the house of Caiaphas, that was the high priest, to the governor's headquarters. It was early morning. They themselves did not enter the governor's headquarters so that they would not be defiled, but could eat the Passover. So Pilate went outside to them and said, what accusation do you bring against this man? They answered him, this man were doing evil. We would not have delivered him over to you. Pilate said to them, take him yourselves, judge him by your own law. The Jews says to him, it is not lawful for us to put anyone to death. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show by what kind of death he was going to die. So here's how this scene develops. They take Jesus and they're standing outside of Pilate's house. They've reached the full extent of their authority as Jews to try someone by their Levitical law, the Old Testament, but now in order to put him to death, they need a higher authority, they think, and they need the Roman authority to sign off on that, and the governor, Pilate, was the one who had the capacity to do this. So they move him from outside their localized Jewish law to those that were sovereign over them, because the Romans were ruling over the Jews at this time, occupying Jerusalem. And so they bring him to Pilate. And so here's the scene. They're standing on the outside, all the Jews and perhaps the soldiers who came and brought Jesus by force. And then Pilate comes out of his house to talk to them. Now, why does Pilate come out of his house? If they're going to him, you don't say, hey, come out and see me. If you're going to see the governor, right, you go in to see him. And the answer, he tells us, is inside the text. They don't go in because they don't want to defile themselves. What does that mean? Well, it's Passover. It's the high holy day of their whole calendar. It's the day they celebrate the fact that God took them out of Egypt, brought them over the Red Sea, and brought them into the wilderness, then finally into the promised land, God extracting them from the hands of Pharaoh and the Egyptians and delivering them. And so in order to celebrate this day, they can't be defiled. You can defile yourself by any number of ways, by touching something that's dead, by doing some sinful act, or by going inside the house of a Gentile. So again, if you were to go inside someone's house who wasn't a Jew, you're defiled. And how embarrassing it would be for a priest who's supposed to be a leader if he has to gather around the Passover and say, I'm sorry, I can't take it because I'm defiled. So they stand outside. And of course, this is the first of many instances in this passage of extreme irony. The reason why they had these laws about defilement is because God is a holy God. And when you go to the Passover, you have to be pure. So what God says is, in order to access me, even though I'm holy and you're unholy, I'm going to develop this system of lambs being brought to me to be sacrificed and killed. And by their shed blood, I'm going to count their blood, even though they're innocent and you're guilty. I'm going to transfer all your guilt upon them, and I'm going to transfer their innocence upon you. And now you can approach me, come into me, not because you're worthy, not because you're holy, you're still not, but because I'm counting that you are, based upon the fact that someone took your place for you. And what we learn now is that actually every single lamb that was killed and innocent blood was shed was not just about that. It was actually a small picture, a symbol of the reality, Jesus, the Lamb of God who would come. But the Jews are on the outside. They don't get that. And so they keep the symbol and kill the reality. We're not going to defile ourselves. But I tell you what we want to do. We want to kill Jesus. and literally, the one God of the universe, his plan is coming to fruition, but they're on the outside. They don't get it. So Pilate comes out to them, verse 29, and says, look, what accusation do they bring? And they say something pretty insulting. They don't answer his question. They just simply say, look, if this wasn't a real problem, we wouldn't have brought it to you. So they push Pilate to reach a decision that he is reticent, as we see all throughout this, he's really unwilling to do. And then the Jews say to him, the real reason we're bringing him to you, though, is because it's unlawful for us to put anyone to death. But that wasn't really the reason. He tells us the reason, verse 32, here's the real reason. This was to fulfill the word that Jesus had spoken to show what kind of death he was going to die. The way the Jews put people to death is by stoning. You may have wondered about this. Stoning was not pelting rocks. It was not that. It was actually taking large rocks, and someone's on the ground, and you're putting them to death by building a pile of rocks. And what you have there at the end is a pile of rocks, and it sends a signal to all those looking around. This is someone who is worthy of capital punishment. But Jesus already said I was going to die. I mean, they're not in control. He's in control. John 12:32, Jesus said, if I am lifted up, I'll draw all people unto me. And so John takes a moment to say, actually the reality is that this is not why all this is happening. They actually had the authority to put somebody to death by their own law. They could have stoned somebody. They didn't need Roman authority to do that. The reason why this is happening, why it's happening, is because Jesus said it would happen that way. He at this point is completely in control. When I think about this first scene, and really all the scenes coming up, it just makes us love Jesus for the way he did these things. Why did Jesus do it this way? I mean, if he just had to die, why not just die? Why not prolong it through this extremely painful way through all this Passion Week? Well, I don't know why, but it's important to note that all the gospel writers follow John. 1/3 of Matthew is about the last week of Jesus. 1/3 of Mark is about the last week of Jesus. 25% of Luke is about the last week of Jesus. In fact, to put it in raw numbers, there are 89 chapters in the Gospels, 29 of them all talk about the last week of Jesus. As somebody said it like this, that really the Gospels are all just the story about the last week of Jesus with really long introductions. It's really true. So why? Why do they want us to focus on this so much? Well, it's important that we understand what Jesus has done for us because it makes us love Jesus more. And as your pastor, my heart's desire over the next few weeks is not any action points. God may tell you to do something as a result, and we don't love people and extend love to people as Jesus did. But my one desire, my heart for myself as we study these passages about Jesus, and frankly, we might be squeamish to think about the scourging and the trial and the crucifixion as we should be. Maybe we don't want to think about it, but we have to think about it because that's what John does. But as we think about it, our hearts are just warmed toward Jesus. We love him more. We're so grateful for all that he's done for us. And so I just thought this morning, by way of application before we go into the next scene, here are 3 reasons to love Jesus more. Backing up in the New Testament and then ending up here. The first reason is that he became a man. As we've said so many times before, this is not a one-time decision. I'm going to become an infant and I'm just going to grow up as a man. It was a daily decision because Jesus always had the power to stop doing this plan. He did. Even in this moment when he's standing trial before this human leader, he could have canceled this. He could have extracted every second that he lived. He didn't have to do this. He submitted himself to trial and suffering and heartache and adolescent and disappointment and broken relationships. All the things that you experienced, he experienced. He became a man. The second reason, as we're reading through John, that makes us love Jesus so much is that Jesus obeyed his Father. This is not a small theme in John. It's a huge theme in chapter 5 especially, and then later on in chapter 15. Jesus is doing exactly what his Father told him to do. And in order to execute this plan, Jesus was not only obedient to his heavenly Father, he was obedient to his human parents. Jesus was always stronger than his dad, and he was always smarter than his mom. And yet he submitted to them and he obeyed them. Why? Because this was the will of his heavenly Father, which reminds us that submission is never a sign of weakness, it's a sign of wisdom. God really is in control. And what God said in Exodus chapter 20 is true. Obey your parents that it may be well with you. Life actually turns out better when we do what our parents tell us to do. And then it's modified in Ephesians chapter 6, which says, obey your parents in the Lord. So that's not in Exodus 20. It's there because it's saying that this obeying our parents is actually modeling what Jesus did for us. And so Jesus didn't have to do that, but he did. And the fact that he humbled himself that way makes us love him so much. And then the third reason that we love Jesus, and this is getting us now back into John chapter 18, is that the way he chose to die included loving so many people. I mean, again, he could have just gone somewhere and been crucified, but that's not the way he did it. He did it publicly. So everybody who watched him, the crowd that was there on Palm Sunday, had a chance to come closer to Jesus. Pilate had deep interactions with Jesus and could have come close to Jesus. The disciples saw up close what it was like, and Jesus was giving his life. Even the Jews themselves who were rejecting this, who were driving all this thing to its fateful conclusion, even they had an opportunity to repent and come to Jesus. In other words, Jesus lived in such a way that it was for people, but he died in such a way that was for other people. So Jesus died more than to give us an example. It's much deeper than that, but it is an example for us. And the way Jesus lived his life, born as a man, the way he obeyed his Father, and the way he died, even in a way that was in submitting to his Father's will, all that makes us throw our hands and eyes toward heaven and say, Jesus, we love you so much. May our hearts be warmed toward Jesus as we think about what he did for us on the cross. So, the first scene is on the outside, but now things move on the inside. Go back to the verse 33, or go back to the text, verse 33. So Pilate entered his headquarters again and called Jesus. Now notice this. The Jews cannot be defiled, but another sense of irony, the Passover lamb, who really is the only pure and undefiled one, he is going into the Gentile house. Why is that? Well, because Jesus actually already said, I have other sheep, John 10, that you don't know about. Jesus was totally unafraid to be around Gentiles and sinners. So Pilate entered his headquarters and again called to Jesus and said to him, are you the king of the Jews? Jesus answered, do you say this of your own accord, or did others say it to you about me? So the second scene is moving from the outside to the inside. It's a private conversation with Jesus and with Pilate. And so Pilate, who doesn't know him, just says to him, are you really the king of the Jews? Now, he doesn't believe he's the king of the Jews. He's just wondering if Jesus believes it. He's trying to figure out what level of crazy he's dealing with. Does this guy really actually believe this? Pilate has absolutely no skin in the game. He's just trying to get enough information to realize how he should handle these people that he's in charge of, these Jewish people. So he says, are you the king of the Jews? And watch what Jesus says. This is so interesting. Jesus is standing before the person who has his life, humanly speaking, in his hands. And Jesus says, look at verse 34 again, do you say this of your own accord, or do others say it to you about me? Jesus essentially said, who told you that? So who told you that? Are you reaching that conclusion that you think I'm the king of the Jews, or is somebody else whispering in your ear? Doesn't even answer him straight up. He answers this question with a question. But it's actually a brilliant question, and in a sense, it's a compassionate question, because he's saying to Pilate, look, you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. I don't think you know the truth. I think you're parroting what someone else has told you. So really, are you a thinking man, Pilate? Have you thought through the implication of what you said, or are you just repeating what the Jews have whispered in your ears? Well, this doesn't sit well with Pilate. Look at verse 35. Pilate answered, am I a Jew? Well, your own nation and the chief priests have delivered you over to me. What have you done? And again, in a sense, you feel for Pilate, because at this point, he has not gotten a straight answer from anyone. He still doesn't know why Jesus is there. Verse 36, Jesus answered, my kingdom is not of this world. If my kingdom were of this world, my servants would have been fighting, that I may not be delivered over to the Jews, but my kingdom is not from this world. And Pilate said to him, so you are a king. Jesus answered, you say that I am a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this person I have come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. So Pilate asked him again, are you really a king? What have you done? And Jesus says, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my servants would be soldiers, but they're not. And they would come be trying to take this with force, but they're not. And if Pilate would have been thinking, he would have understood there's actually an embedded insult in this as well. My kingdom is not of this world, but of course, Pilate, yours is. My servants are not soldiers, but of course, yours are. They don't come fighting, but of course you came and took me by force. This is how different you and I are. So Pilate presses him again. So you're saying you are a king. And Jesus says really what he's about. Go back to verse 37. Then Pilate said to him, you are a king. Jesus answered, you say that I'm a king. For this purpose I was born, and for this purpose I've come into the world, to bear witness to the truth. Everyone who is of the truth listens to my voice. And again, he's saying to him two things. Pilate, you have a chance to know the truth, but clearly you don't. Here's how Pilate gets out of this. Pilate said to him, look at this, so interesting. Look at verse 38. What is truth? Now there's a massive philosophical question. So why does Pilate ask that? Is he actually tapping into the philosophy that was around him? There was a lot of that. Really, what is truth? Pilate could have been exposed to that in the Greek culture that was there prevalent among the Roman culture. He could have been asking from a theological question, what is truth? Are you willing to unpack this? We don't know why he's saying that, but we get a clue from how he said it. He says, what is truth? And then he walks out. So he's not trying to provoke conversation. He's trying to end conversation. You're trying to lead me to truth. What is truth? He turns his back and walks out. And as we were in thinking biblically last week, I referenced this passage, and it just reminds me, this is how people deal with you if you want them to become Christians. This is kind of the dominant thing in culture. Why? Well, because Jesus said to him, look, Pilate, I'm here, but you're over here. And for you to know the truth, you've got to move from here to over here. You're not where you need to be. You've got to move. And Pilate says, what is truth? In other words, if there's no truth, then I don't need to move at all. Because if there's no foundation in which to believe, then why don't we even move? So Pilate is a pure skeptic. He doesn't quite believe it. And so embedded in this passage, you have something very interesting. Jesus gives us a strategy on how to deal with the skeptic. So here's Jesus' strategy, and I think strategy that we can borrow from Jesus. The first thing Jesus does is he calls him out. He asks him, really, are you thinking about this? And so if you genuinely love the Lord and you really want to see friends and family members saved, at some point you're going to start sharing the gospel with them. Not an invitation to church. That's not bad. That's good. But beyond that, like, hey, what are you thinking about Jesus? What do you think about the Lord? Have you given your heart and life to Jesus Christ? You're actually sharing the gospel. That's a step beyond just an invitation to church. What do you think about this? And if someone is living in Arkansas and they're not a Christian, they've had to learn to put up defenses, most likely, against people like you. So, you've heard these before, but yeah, I probably ought to go there with a smile on your face. Which, if you think about it, is just a subtle way of saying, but I'm not, so please step off. Just don't do this to me anymore. Yeah, I ought to, but I know I shouldn't. Or they may say something like this. Well, the truth of the matter is, all gods are kind of the same. And it doesn't really matter if I go to church or not because I know of bad people who go to church and good people who don't. So it doesn't really matter. So Jesus tells us a good response. And I have to say it in love and kindness, but here's Jesus' good response. Listen, here it is. Here's a good response to all that. Okay, who told you that? Because most people that have an immediate kind of buffer to put you off or your invitation to follow Christ haven't really thought about it. They're just parroting what they've heard. They're like Pilate. Pilate heard he's king of the Jews. He's repeating what he's heard. Someone heard all religions are the same. So they're just saying, well, it's all the same. Doesn't really matter what I do. So ask them, where did you hear that? Who told you that? Because it's simply not true. And we'll say, Pastor, I couldn't say that because that's inviting a conversation. Now listen to me, here's a word from God. Live dangerously. No joke. Put yourself out there. See what happens. Don't decide already, I'm not going to share my faith because I know what they're going to say. Really? Put yourself out there. Just see what happens. Who told you that? You say, well, what if they've thought about it? Good. 90% chance time, they haven't thought about it. They just never had, listen, they've never had somebody love them enough to call their bluff. It's a lie. It's a lie from the devil. They just need you in their life to push back. That's why we do thinking biblically. That's why we do city center conversation. We're going to push back against all these lies that are just assumed. Now, there is always the chance they have thought about it. You say, Pastor, that would be awful. I don't want to have a conversation about world religions. What if they say, well, I've read the Quran, and I've read the Analects of Confucius, and I've read the Bhagavad Gita, and then I've read the New Testament and the Jewish Torah, and I've read them all, and they all seem the same to me. well, if that's the case, if they've looked at all the world religions, then you can just say, well, yeah, that's not true. Because just start with Jesus. In John 14, we just read that. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No thinking person can take an honest, genuine, gracious look at the Gospels and come to the conclusion that Jesus thought there's so many ways to come to God. I mean, just take the Passion Week. Why would Jesus go to the cross and die if there were all these other ways? I mean, the Gospels don't make sense. Jesus is unashamedly clear that he alone is the exclusive way to the Father. That's it. And people need to know that. And they need to know that you believe it. So the first thing Jesus does is he pushes back. He says, are you thinking? Are you a thinking person, Pilate? Who told you that? Or is that your own thought? Here's the second thing Jesus does. When pressed, he tells them, yes, I am the king of the kingdom. So in other words, he asks him if he's thinking, but secondly, he tells them the truth. Now, Christians don't have to agree on everything. Even our own church members have different views on how we get saved or the end times or different kinds of interesting points of theology, the origins of creation, all this stuff. But we're all agreed on some fundamental things. We're agreed that there's one God. We're agreed that that one God has revealed himself through his one Son, Jesus Christ. And we're all in agreement that the only access to that one God is hearing and responding to his word. With all that we're not sure about, we're sure of these three things. God is real, he's revealed himself through Jesus, and that Jesus comes through his word, as Jesus said, the truth he just said here. And so Jesus tells them that straight up. I am a king, and all this is true. And Pilate, you've got a chance. You can know the truth or you can reject the truth. And so it's very important when given the opportunity that we tell people graciously, kindly, but we tell them that truth. The only reason we wouldn't is if we were unsure about it. Maybe there is another way. Maybe Jesus has this provision clause where they never really got saved, but here's another opportunity after they die. Well, none of that is true. It's one God, one Son, one way of salvation, one word that teaches us that, and only one life in which we have to respond to that. And after that life, all that opportunity is squandered. And it's very important that the people around us know that, and it's very important that we know, that they know that we believe that. It's very important that they get around thinking people, quote, normal people, who are working with them, living with them, going to school with them, playing sports with them, but at the same time have a deep, unmoved conviction that Jesus Christ alone is the way of salvation. And Jesus made that so clear to Pilate. So, in the shadow of Easter, I want to plant a seed in your heart. Is there someone on your mind, on your heart, you're burdened for right now? You're thinking, Lord, if anyone would come with me a Sunday, if anyone would come to know his faith, I hope it would be. So what name would go in that blank? And I want to challenge you now, again, thinking about the cross, thinking about Easter, would you begin to pray about that person? And I believe this is just, again, a great application for this text. Jesus on the outside there with the Jews makes us think of Jesus and love him more, that he would put himself on the outside. And then Jesus on the inside willing to come in with Pilate. Jesus didn't owe Pilate anything. It's very clear here that Jesus is not on trial, Pilate's on trial. He's asking him the questions. Jesus is the sovereign, Pilate is the servant, but even though that's the case, he's not afraid to engage him. Jesus on the inside reminds me, I've got a dialogue with people who I'm on the inside with, my friends, my family. Put myself out there and by God's grace, see them come to faith in Jesus Christ. Here's how John concludes the story. Look at verse 38. Pilate said to him, what is truth? After he'd said this, he went back outside to the Jews and told them, I find no guilt in him. But you have a custom that I should release one man for you at the Passover. So do you want me to release to you the king of the Jews? Not they said, verse 40, they cried out again, not this man, but Barabbas. And a little commentary there. Now, Barabbas was a robber. We don't know what this custom was, but evidently they had a custom at the Passover that they could release a criminal. And they have two options before them. They could release Jesus, which Pilate thinks, standing outside of the situation, making an observation that's logical because really, he's done nothing wrong. I mean, from this whole conversation, he never got one straight answer as to what crime he committed. On the other hand, you have Barabbas, who is a robber. But the word there is stronger than that. He's not a petty thief, or Pilate wouldn't even known who he was. He's perhaps an insurrectionist. He's something that's done something so big that Pilate would have known about it. It's ready for capital punishment. And so they scream out, give us Barabbas. And one thing that's interesting about the Gospel of John is sometimes we know people's names and sometimes we don't. Like last week, why do we know Malchus' name, who Peter cut off his ear? We know Nicodemus' name, but other people Jesus talked to we don't know. We don't know the name of the woman at the well. We don't know the name of the blind man. So anyway, all that makes us think as we read the Gospel of John, when he does mention a name, it has some significance. And perhaps that's the case here. His name is Barabbas. So the word bar means son. Remember Jesus called Simon son of Bar Jonah? So his dad's name was Jonas, and so Simon was son of. Now why would you say that? Well, it's because you have two people that have the same name. You need a way to distinguish them because they didn't have last names like we would understand them. I went to a really small high school, but there was another guy in 2 grades older than me named Steve Smith. And of course, he was 6'2". So I went through high school as little Steve Smith, and he was big Steve Smith. That's how they told us apart. So evidently there were other guys with his name, and so Bar was in front of this. So Bar means son. Stay with me. You know what Abba means. It means father. Bar Abba. Barabbas. So maybe what John is doing is he's showing this profound irony that this man, whose name was literally son of a father, they chose over the son of the father. Give us Barabbas. John also says in that commentary that he was a robber. Again, why would we take somebody, Pilate's thinking, that's totally innocent over somebody who's clearly and totally guilty? Well, the answer is because they thought Jesus was a thief as well, but a greater one. He's stealing the glory of God. By claiming to be God and claiming to be the Son of God, he's actually stolen from God's glory, and that's a greater crime. But the reality is that Jesus had already made this contrast in John 10. The thief, the robber, people like Barabbas, Jesus said, come to steal and to kill and destroy. But I've come that they might have life and have it more abundantly. But they would actually want to kill the one who is taking from them than actually keep the one alive who is giving life. Jesus said, I'm not a taker, I'm a giver. Jesus didn't steal from them like Barabbas did and take what was not theirs. He actually gave what they could never have without him. But they would rather kill the giver of life and let the person who actually stolen from them and take go free. The truth of the matter, though, is that they had to kill Jesus. And what I mean was, this is Passover. The high priest is there. And all the way back to the book of Exodus, when the Passovers come, the leaders were told, you have to take the pure, spotless lamb to be sacrificed. Without knowing it, Caiaphas, as if directed by the hand of God himself, chose the pure, spotless Lamb of God to be sacrificed. And in a little picture of the gospel, Barabbas the sinner goes free, and Jesus the innocent is killed. And in that way, we're all Barabbas. We're all the guilty ones who go free because Jesus, the innocent one, was killed for us. So here's our story. Jesus on the outside helps us understand that he went on the outside for us. Jesus on the inside shows he is totally unafraid to go in and engage people, to push back against the darkness and teach them the truth about who he is. And then Pilate back on the outside, talking to the Jews, helps us understand this, that all of this was according to the plan of God. Pilate and the Jews and even the high priest are doing exactly as Jesus had directed them. Or again, as Jesus said in John chapter 2, for this reason the Father loves me, because I lay down my life that I may take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. This charge I received from authority, my Father. All the events that are happening here are happening at the will and the initiative of Jesus, because he loves us so much, and for that reason, we love him.